People in Appalachia say sound travels differently in the mountains. A rifle shot can echo for miles. A scream can bounce through valleys and seem close when it's actually far away. And sometimes, late at night, people hear things nobody can explain. In October of 1936, a mining town called Briar's Hollow sat deep near the Tennessee-Kentucky border, hidden between dense Appalachian ridges. It was small, 32 families, one church, one general store, one coal mine carved directly into Black Vein Mountain. Most people there had never left the valley in their entire lives, and outsiders rarely stayed long. Not because the town was dangerous, because something about it felt wrong after dark. The forests were too quiet. The fog stayed too long, and sound carried strangely through the hollow. Elias Boone had lived there since childhood, 34 years old, coal miner, married, one infant daughter, like everyone else in Briar's Hollow. He believed the mountains held secrets better left alone. The story began on the night of October 11th. Rain drifted softly through the trees, while Elias sat smoking on his porch after a 12-hour shift underground. Inside the cabin, his wife Ruth hummed quietly while rocking their baby beside the fireplace. Everything felt normal, until the banjo started playing, faint at first. Somewhere deep in the woods north of town, 3 slow notes repeating over and over again. Not cheerful, not drunken music. Slow, uneven, almost hesitant, like someone learning the same melody repeatedly in the dark. Elias looked toward the tree line immediately. The sound was distant, but unnaturally clear, despite the rain. Then every dog in town started barking at once. Ruth stepped onto the porch, holding the baby tighter. "You hear that?" Elias nodded slowly. Lights began appearing across the valley as neighbors stepped outside their homes. Nobody joked, nobody shouted, because everyone noticed the same thing immediately. The music didn't sound like it came from one place. Depending on where you stood, it seemed to move. Sometimes from the hills, sometimes from the creek, sometimes beneath the ground itself. Old Martha Weaver crossed herself outside the church. "I don't like this," she whispered. The melody continued nearly 20 minutes, then stopped completely, and the silence afterward felt worse. No wind, no insects, no owls, nothing. Then somewhere high in the mountains, something screamed. The sound echoed through the valley long enough to make several children start crying inside nearby cabins. Elias felt his stomach tighten, because it didn't sound like any animal he recognized. That night nobody slept well. Around 3 a.m., Elias woke suddenly and found Ruth sitting upright beside the window, staring outside. "You hear it again," he whispered. She nodded, very faintly through the trees. The banjo had returned, closer now. The next morning, the town gathered outside the general store, arguing about the noise. Some blamed moonshiners, others thought teenagers from another county were trespassing nearby. But the older residents looked genuinely frightened, especially Samuel Grady, the oldest miner in Briar's Hollow, nearly 70 years old. When someone asked if he recognized the melody, Samuel went pale. "Y'all stay away from the north woods," he said quietly. Nobody laughed. Elias frowned. "What's in the north woods?" Samuel hesitated too long before answering. "My granddaddy heard music like that back in 1881. What happened?" Samuel stared toward Black Vein Mountain. 3 people disappeared. The conversation ended there. The music returned the next night. Earlier this time, right after sunset. 3 repeating notes. Again, again, again. Some people covered their ears. Others stood completely still listening, and a few started humming along unconsciously. Elias noticed Ruth quietly repeating the melody while washing dishes. When he mentioned it, she looked confused. "I didn't realize I was doing that." By the 3rd night, things got worse. Livestock became agitated after dark. Horses kicked violently inside their stalls. 2 hunting dogs clawed so hard at a cabin door, their paws bled across the porch. Even the forest felt different. People reported lantern lights moving between trees after midnight, too far into the woods to belong to locals, and always moving north. Then Henry Cutter disappeared. 42 years old, hunter, lived alone near Miller Creek. Witnesses last saw him leaving the tavern carrying a shotgun and lantern just before midnight. He was angry, told several miners he was done listening to fake ghost music every damn night. He headed into the North Woods alone. Nobody saw him again. The search party found his lantern the next morning beside a creek nearly 2 miles from town, still burning. Then they found the footprints. Henry's boot tracks led deeper into the forest, but after several hundred feet, the tracks suddenly stopped. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing, just mud, and dozens of overlapping footprints from other people surrounding the area, barefoot, different sizes, all leading uphill toward Black Vein Mountain. The men searching grew nervous immediately, especially when they realized how silent the forest had become. Then the banjo started again, close, very close. Somewhere ahead in the fog, one younger miner whispered, "Somebody's out there." Samuel Grady grabbed his arm instantly. "No," the old man said quietly. "That ain't somebody." A few minutes later, they found Henry's boots, placed neatly beside a dead tree, clean, standing upright. And inside one of them, searchers found human teeth, small ones, like a child's. Nobody spoke for several seconds. One miner vomited immediately. Another fired his rifle blindly into the trees. The banjo stopped instantly, and for one brief moment, Elias thought he saw movement uphill between the fog and trees. Not a monster, not something impossible. Just the outline of a person standing completely still, watching them. Then, it disappeared. The search party ran back before sunset. Nobody returned to the North Woods after that, not even during daylight. But later that night, right after midnight, the music returned again. Only this time sounded much closer to town. By the fourth night, Briar's Hollow no longer felt like a normal town. People spoke quietly now. Windows stayed covered after sunset. Children were kept indoors. And every night, at exactly midnight, the banjo returned, always the same 3 notes. Slow dragging, impossible to ignore. Elias Boone stopped sleeping properly. The melody stayed inside his head long after it ended. Sometimes while working underground, inside Black Vein Mine, he caught himself humming it beneath his breath without realizing. The first time it happened, he stopped immediately. But then he noticed something worse. Other miners were humming too. Different men, different tunnels, all repeating the same melody. And every single one stopped at the exact same moment. Like they'd received the same signal. The mine itself began feeling wrong. Workers reported hearing movement inside collapsed shafts. Some claimed they heard banjo strings echoing far below active tunnels. Others blamed exhaustion, mine gas, stress. But nobody sounded convinced anymore. Then Henry Cutter came back, 3 days after disappearing. A little girl fetching water near Miller Creek spotted him standing beside the trees at sunrise, motionless, covered in mud, barefoot. By the time Elias arrived with several others carrying rifles, half the town had gathered nearby. Henry looked thinner, his skin pale gray from cold and exposure. But the strangest thing was his expression. He smiled constantly, not wildly, not crazily, just calmly, like someone pretending everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. "Henry," Elias called carefully. No response. Henry stared toward Black Vein Mountain, then quietly said, "They're still playing." Nobody moved. Elias stepped closer. "Who?" Henry's smile widened slightly. "The people underground." Several townspeople backed away immediately. Henry then started humming the melody softly, and for the first time, the tune sounded comforting, warm, almost familiar. Elias hated how badly he wanted to keep listening. Pastor Abel Hale arrived moments later, carrying a Bible beneath one arm. The second Henry noticed him, his smile vanished. "You shouldn't ring the church bell anymore," Henry whispered. Pastor Hale frowned. "Why?" Henry looked toward the mountain. "Because they hear it too." Then he walked calmly back into the woods. Nobody followed. That night, people heard footsteps circling cabins after midnight. Slow, careful, like someone checking doors. Elias sat awake beside the fireplace holding his rifle, while Ruth rocked their daughter silently. Then came 3 knocks at the front door, soft, evenly spaced. Everyone inside froze. Elias approached the window carefully and saw Henry standing outside, smiling again, but he wasn't alone. Several people stood near the trees behind him. Some were recognized immediately. A woman missing since 1928. A miner killed during a cave-in years earlier. Another man who supposedly drowned in Miller Creek. All standing silently together, watching the cabin. The banjo played faintly somewhere beyond them in the forest. Ruth whispered, "Don't open it." Nobody outside moved. They simply stood there for hours. At sunrise, they were gone. Over the next few days, the town slowly began falling apart. Children started sleepwalking. Families woke to muddy footprints inside locked homes. People claimed they heard whispering beneath floorboards late at night, and every evening, the music sounded closer. Then the church choir vanished. Wednesday evening prayer had just begun, when every candle inside the church suddenly went out. Pastor Hale later claimed the darkness lasted only seconds, but during those seconds, music began playing beneath the floorboards, not outside. Underneath the church itself. People panicked immediately. Several ran for the exits, others froze. Then singing started below them. Low voices, dozens of them, perfectly matching the melody. When lanterns were relit moments later, half the choir was missing. No broken windows, no open doors, nothing. Only muddy footprints leading toward the church basement. The townspeople refused to search below. Instead, they nailed the basement shut. But by morning, every nail had been pushed back out from the inside. That same afternoon, Samuel Grady finally admitted something he'd hidden for decades. He gathered several townspeople inside the general store, while rain hammered against the roof overhead. "My granddaddy told me stories about another settlement near this mountain," Samuel whispered. Nobody interrupted him. Said people there started hearing music too. "What happened to them?" Elias asked quietly. Samuel looked toward the window. One winter. The old man swallowed hard. The entire town disappeared. Silence filled the store. "No bodies?" someone asked. Samuel slowly shook his head. Nothing left behind except empty houses. Then he added softly, "And music coming from underground." That night, Elias barely slept. Around midnight, he woke suddenly to hear Ruth humming beside him, eyes closed, still asleep. Then their daughter began humming too from her crib. And outside the cabin, dozens of voices quietly joined them from the woods. Elias waited until morning before entering the North Woods. He told nobody except Samuel Grady. The old man tried stopping him immediately. "You go up there alone," Samuel warned. "You might not come back thinking straight." But Elias couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. People were vanishing, and nobody else was willing to search beyond the old mining trails. By sunrise, Elias entered the forest, carrying a lantern, rope, and revolver. The deeper he walked, the quieter everything became. No birds, no wind. Only distant water, dripping somewhere through the hills. Then eventually, the banjo, faint, below him. After nearly an hour climbing through dense woods, Elias found something hidden behind thick overgrowth, an abandoned mine entrance. Old timber supports leaned dangerously sideways. Rusted tracks disappeared into darkness underground. The place looked decades older than Black Vein Mine, and above the entrance, someone had carved symbols into the wood. Not words, repeating marks resembling musical notes. Elias descended slowly. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of wet stone and rotting wood. The tunnel stretched deeper than expected, and stranger still, it didn't look professionally mined. Sections of the walls appeared hand-carved, uneven, ancient. As Elias moved deeper underground, he noticed markings covering the stone walls. Lines, patterns, repeating symbols. The same sequence again and again. Like someone obsessively recording music. Then he heard movement ahead. Footsteps, slow, dragging. Elias raised the lantern higher. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber, and inside it stood people. Dozens of them, motionless, facing the far wall. Some Elias recognized immediately, missing townspeople. The church choir, Henry Cutter. Others looked older, much older, all standing silently together, none reacting to his presence. Elias whispered, Henry. Several heads turned slowly toward him at once. The movement felt wrong, not unnatural. Just delayed, like exhausted people waking from deep sleep. Henry stepped forward slightly. His expression remained calm. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Elias tightened his grip on the revolver. "What is this place?" Henry looked toward the far side of the cavern. "We found it under the mountain." "Found what?" For several seconds Henry said nothing. Then Elias heard it. Not banjo music. Air. Wind forcing itself through narrow tunnels deep underground. But somehow, the vibration created the same repeating 3 notes. Again, again, again. The chamber itself was producing the melody naturally. Henry smiled faintly. "They heard it first," he whispered, looking at the others. Elias noticed something horrifying then. Everyone standing inside the chamber was breathing in rhythm with the sound, slow, synchronized, like sleepwalkers trapped inside the same dream. Then Elias spotted old mining equipment near the walls, crates, lanterns, rusted tools, and newspaper pages dated 1881. The missing settlement Samuel mentioned had been here. Underground, something terrible had happened beneath Blackvein Mountain long before Briar's Hollow existed. Then one woman quietly spoke without looking at Elias. "It gets louder every night." Others began whispering too, repeating the same sentence, over and over. "It gets louder every night." Elias backed away slowly, because he finally understood the real horror. Nobody underground appeared trapped. They had chosen to stay. Then from somewhere deeper beneath the cavern, another sound echoed upward. Not music, a human voice, singing the melody softly in complete darkness. And judging by the distance, whatever made the sound was far below them. Elias returned to Briar's Hollow just before sunset. But the town already looked abandoned. Doors stood open. Livestock wandered freely through muddy roads. And everywhere, people were humming, softly, unconsciously. The melody had spread beyond fear now. It had become routine, like breathing. Elias rushed home. Ruth sat beside the fireplace holding their daughter silently. Neither acknowledged him entering. Both were humming, perfectly synchronized. "Ruth," Elias whispered. She stopped slowly and looked at him. Her eyes were tired, not possessed, exhausted. "I hear it even when it stops now," she admitted quietly. That night, the forest itself seemed alive. Wind moved through the trees, carrying the melody naturally across the valley. The sound no longer came from one direction. It echoed everywhere, through branches, through creek beds, through old mining shafts beneath the town. Then people began leaving. Entire families walked calmly toward the woods, after midnight carrying lanterns. No panic, no screaming, just quiet movement uphill toward Blackvein Mountain. Some neighbors tried stopping them. None resisted. They simply kept walking, like sleepwalkers. At dawn, 2 state investigators finally arrived after nearby towns reported disappearances. Both men dismissed the stories immediately. Mass hysteria, isolation, mine gas exposure. That was their explanation. Until they heard the music themselves. One investigator entered the North Woods alone, carrying a flashlight and revolver. He never returned. The second man searched until evening, before abandoning the valley entirely. But before leaving, he told Elias something disturbing. "There are tunnels under half this town," he said quietly. "Old tunnels, older than the mine itself." That same night, Pastor Hale rang the church bell, continuously hoping to gather whoever remained. Only 9 people arrived. During prayer, the banjo started again, closer than ever. Then another sound joined it, singing human voices from beneath the church floor. Pastor Hale stopped praying immediately. The singing matched the melody perfectly. And among the voices, Elias heard Ruth. But Ruth was standing beside him. He turned toward her slowly. She looked terrified, because she heard it too. Her own voice singing beneath the ground. Then came knocking from outside the church. Dozens of slow knocks against the walls. Windows, doors. Everyone inside froze. Elias looked through the entrance window. People stood outside surrounding the church silently. Missing townspeople, neighbors, children, all staring inward, all humming softly together. And behind them, deep in the trees, Hundreds of lantern lights flickered across the mountain. By the end of October, Briar's Hollow was empty. Officially, state records blamed a mining collapse and severe flooding for the abandonment of the valley. No investigation continued after winter. Most nearby towns avoided mentioning Briar's Hollow entirely. But years later, one object was recovered from inside the abandoned general store, a damaged audio recorder. The voice on it belonged to Elias Boone. The recording begins with heavy breathing. Then Elias, speaking quietly, "If somebody finds this, don't come looking for us." A long pause follows. Then distant banjo music can be heard faintly in the background. Elias continues, "It ain't ghosts." Another pause. "We thought it was something supernatural. It ain't." The sound of wind echoes through the recording. Then Elias explains what he finally discovered beneath Black Vein Mountain. The tunnels below Briar's Hollow connected to enormous natural caverns deep underground. Air pressure moving through narrow rock passages created vibrations resembling music. For decades, isolated settlers who heard the sound too long began suffering sleep deprivation, paranoia, hallucinations, and obsession. Some believed the mountain was speaking to them. Others formed small, hidden groups underground. Entire families eventually disappeared willingly into the tunnels, generation after generation. The melody became ritual, tradition, addiction. Then Elias says something disturbing, but that still don't explain the voices. The recorder crackles loudly. Elias sounds exhausted now, terrified. "We sealed every tunnel we found. The music still comes through the floors." A loud banging sound interrupts the recording somewhere nearby. Then silence. When Elias speaks again, his voice shakes violently. "I keep hearing Ruth downstairs at night." Another pause. "She's been gone 3 days." The banjo grows louder, closer. Then Elias whispers something almost impossible to hear. "There's people living down there." The final minutes of the tape are mostly static. Footsteps echo faintly, then distant singing. Dozens of voices repeating the melody together somewhere underground. And finally, one last sentence from Elias Boone. "Sometimes late at night, in Appalachia, if the wind is still enough, you can still hear the banjo playing under the ground."